The king approached his daughter, his voice shaking with anger. "You must apologize to the people and to this woman for what you've done," he demanded. But the princess turned to the crowd, her face twisted in contempt. "Apologize? Why should I apologize to them? If the child dies, what does it matter to me? How dare she bring her filthy baby near me? I am royalty, and I apologize to no one." With that, she turned and walked away, heading back to the palace. Once upon a time in a small village, there lived a beautiful girl named Lila. She was the most stunning maiden in the entire village, and even in the neighboring villages. But she wasn't just any maiden. She was the daughter of the king. Lila was so beautiful that even strong, battle-hardened warriors would do anything just to catch a glimpse of her. But she was a rare gem, hidden from view. She only left the palace once a month to bathe in the village stream, and during that time, only she and her maidens were allowed to be there. Her father, the king, loved her dearly. He always encouraged her to connect with her people, at least during festivals, so they could know her better. He wanted them to understand what to expect from their future queen. However, what the villagers didn't know was that the princess wasn't as kind as they imagined. While they thought she was gentle just like her father, but in truth Lila was cruel and selfish. Inside the palace, her maids were forbidden from speaking about what really happened behind those walls. And among her maids was a young girl named Nina, who had come to the palace with high hopes and excitement. For her, it was an honor to serve the princess and to witness the beauty that no one else in the village could see. But when Nina arrived, her joy quickly shattered as she faced the harsh reality. The princess wasn't what she had imagined. Her wickedness was unbearable. She looked down on everyone, and the only person she ever listened to was her father. One evening, the king called his daughter to his chambers. He spoke softly, trying to reason with her. "My daughter, the girls who serve you have left their families and homes to be here for you. They admire and love you. Please, don't break their spirits or make them regret their decision." But Lila looked at her father gently, as though she was about to say something meaningful. But instead, her words were sharp. "They came to serve me, father. It's an honor for them to be in my presence. My beauty is something they could never dream of having. And I owe them nothing." The king sighed, his heart heavy with disappointment. "But beauty is nothing without a good heart. You need to learn this." But she simply excused herself, claiming she needed rest, and left the king's chambers. As she walked away, the king worried that the beauty so admired by many was also becoming her greatest downfall. Outside the palace, men from the village continued to bring gifts every day, hoping to win Lila's favor. But she never once came out to greet them. Instead, she stayed locked in her chambers, admiring herself in the mirror. The young women of the village were growing impatient, hoping she would marry soon. They believed that if Lila found a husband, maybe then the men in the village would finally notice them. But as long as the beautiful princess remained single, they couldn't compete with her beauty or her status. A great festival was approaching, one that took place only once every 5 years, and it was considered one of the most important in the kingdom. The entire village buzzed with excitement, for this festival was unlike any other. It was a time to celebrate, give thanks to the gods, and bring everyone together in joy and unity. But this year, the people had a special request for the king. They wanted his daughter, Princess Lila, to join them. For years many had wondered why the king kept his daughter hidden, only allowing her to appear briefly at the village stream once a month. Some villagers believed it was the king's way of guarding her beauty from the eyes of others, but now they wanted a chance to see her up close, to admire her grace during this grand event. That evening, the king sat down with Lila, his voice soft but firm as he spoke to her. "My daughter, the people have asked for you to be present at the festival. I have given my word that I would speak with you, and it would bring them great joy if you appeared. If you don't, it may seem to them that you don't respect me, or worse, that you have a poor character. Please, Lila, just this once, grant me this request." But the princess, as usual, didn't care what the people thought of her. To her, they were beneath her. But after listening to her father's gentle plea, she reluctantly agreed to think about it. The day of the festival finally arrived. The village square was packed with people from all over, strong young men, wealthy bachelors from neighboring kingdoms, and warriors dressed in their finest clothes, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous princess. Word had spread far and wide that Lila, the most beautiful woman in the land, would be making an appearance, and the festival, which was meant to honor the gods, had quickly turned into a competition to win her favor. Gifts piled high as men tried to outdo one another, showcasing their wealth and status. Gold, fine fabrics, and jewels sparkled in the sun, but none of it seemed to impress Lila. She stood beside her father, her face twisted in disgust, as though something foul was in the air. But instead of seeing her disdain, the people were mesmerized by her beauty. They whispered amongst themselves, saying, "Such beauty doesn't need to smile. Her smile must be priceless." The eligible men hoped that their efforts, their wealth, their displays of strength, would earn them even the slightest smile from the princess. Among the crowd stood Mona, a hard-working and successful farmer. He wasn't like the other men who had come to the festival to show off. But he had always been curious about Princess Lila, not because of her beauty. He wanted to understand what it was about her that caused such chaos among the men, why warriors from far and wide would come just to see her. Mona's younger sister, Nina, had always admired the princess and had left their home to serve her at the palace. She believed that if she served Lila well, she might introduce her brother to the princess, hoping they might fall in love. But he had laughed at the idea, telling Nina not to worry about trying to please the princess, but she had made up her mind. Now, standing in the square, Mona watched as Lila stood there, her beauty undeniable. But as he observed her, he thought to himself, any woman can be beautiful on the outside with the right clothes and jewels. Lila wore the finest beads and fabrics, her hair and skin glowing under the sunlight. She was, after all, the daughter of the king. Of course, she would look stunning. But Mona knew many village girls who could outshine her if given the same luxury. For Mona, what mattered most was inner beauty, character, kindness, and the ability to understand the struggles of others. As he looked at the princess, he couldn't help but think, beauty is one thing, but who is she inside? That was the true question, the one that would reveal if Lila was truly someone worthy of admiration. While others were lost in her appearance, Mona's thoughts drifted to the women in the village, those who had kindness in their hearts, who knew what it meant to love and care for others. For him, that was what made someone beautiful. And as he stood there, he realized that no amount of physical beauty could replace a good heart. The eligible men knelt before Princess Lila, offering their gifts and rarely taking their eyes off her. As they showed off their strength and skills in the circle, they watched her closely, hoping for any sign of approval or praise. But Lila remained uninterested, her face as cold and distant as ever. And as the festival was nearing its end and the princess was about to leave the village square, a young woman suddenly rushed toward her, carrying her baby girl in her arms. This woman had waited a long time for a chance to speak with the princess. For months, she had stood by the road leading to the stream, hoping Lila would notice her and her child. After 15 years of marriage without a child, this baby girl was her miracle, and she believed that if she could just show the princess, Lila might bless her child or grant her a wish. The princess's maidens tried to stop the woman, but she refused to be held back. "The princess will talk to me," she insisted. With a hopeful smile, she approached Lila, cradling her baby and speaking excitedly about her blessing. But Lila didn't share in the woman's joy. With a disgusted look, she shoved the woman and her baby to the ground. The woman fell hard, her baby tumbling from her arms. The princess turned to her maidens, her face twisted in anger. "How dare you let that filthy woman and her child get near me?" she shouted, slapping each maiden across the face. The maidens lowered their heads in shame, clearly used to the princess's cruelty. Gasps echoed through the crowd as they watched the scene unfold, shocked by Lila's behavior. All the woman had wanted was for the princess to see her baby, perhaps even give the child a name. But instead, she had been treated with utter disrespect and cruelty. As the woman sat on the ground, cradling her baby, panic filled her eyes. Her baby wasn't moving. No matter how she turned her or called out, the little girl wasn't breathing. Tears streamed down the woman's face as she ran to the king, falling at his feet. "My baby, she's not breathing," she sobbed. Fear flashed in the king's eyes as he took the child into his arms, desperately trying to wake her. The villagers stood in silent horror, their hearts aching for the woman and her lifeless child. The fear and pain in the king's eyes were clear as he frantically called for the midwives to come and tend to the baby. The crowd turned toward Princess Lila, their faces filled with disappointment and disgust. For the first time, they were seeing her true nature, her wickedness, her lack of compassion. The king approached his daughter, his voice shaking with anger. "You must apologize to the people and to this woman for what you've done," he demanded. The princess turned to the crowd, her face twisted in contempt. "Apologize? Why should I apologize to them? If the child dies, what does it matter to me? How dare she bring her filthy baby near me? I am royalty, and I apologize to no one." With that, she turned and walked away, heading back to the palace. Her maidens stood frozen, too afraid to follow her, knowing what she was capable of. The king, his face heavy with sorrow, turned back to the crowd. "I am deeply sorry for my daughter's behavior. Please, forgive her," he pleaded. But the damage was done. The people had seen the truth: the princess's beauty meant nothing without character, and the admiration they once had for her quickly turned into regret. The villagers, once eager to serve and admire the princess, now realized that they had been wrong to place her on such a high pedestal. A new understanding spread through the crowd: beauty without kindness is worthless. And though the king tried to make amends, the people knew that one day, Princess Lila would have to face the consequences of her own actions. After much effort, the midwife finally succeeded. The little baby took a breath, then let out a cry, and relief washed over the crowd. The mother's tears of sorrow turned into tears of joy as she held her baby tightly, rocking her back and forth. The people, who had been holding their breath, finally exhaled, grateful that the baby was alive. But the scene had left a deep mark on everyone. Mothers in the crowd, shaken by what they had witnessed, approached the king, their voices trembling as they pleaded with him. "Please, Your Majesty, send our daughters home. They are serving the princess, but she is a bad influence. After today, we fear for their safety." They feared that Lila, with her heartless actions, might harm their daughters too. The king, troubled by their concerns, raised his hand to calm them. "I promise you, everything is under control. The princess will apologize for her actions, and no harm will come to your daughters. Trust me, I will ensure this." But even as the king spoke, it was clear that the damage had been done. The warriors and eligible men, who had come to the festival with high hopes, quietly gathered their gifts and left, their hearts heavy with disappointment. No one had expected the day to end like this. That night, the king visited Lila in her chambers. The weight of the day's events pressed on his shoulders, and for the first time, he questioned his own efforts in raising her. Had he failed her? How had his daughter, once innocent and full of potential, become so cold and heartless? He sat beside her bed, his voice soft but firm. "Lila, my daughter, do you understand the importance of compassion? Of kindness to our people? They look up to you, and yet today you hurt them deeply. That baby nearly died, and you didn't care." But Lila, still angry from the day's events, turned away. "Father, I don't care what they think of me. I am royalty. I don't need to apologize to anyone." The king sighed heavily, his heart aching. He had hoped she would listen, but it was clear she wasn't ready to understand. He left her chambers, more troubled than ever. Meanwhile, in his own home, Mona sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. He had always suspected the princess might not be as kind as others believed, but what he witnessed today had shocked him. He couldn't understand how someone could lack compassion, even for a baby struggling for life. To him, that was a clear sign of danger. After several weeks, one morning, troubling news reached the king. Princess Lila had fallen ill. What had started as a simple fever had quickly worsened, and now, angry red rashes were spreading all over her once flawless skin. The king, deeply alarmed, immediately sent for the chief priest, hoping he could heal his daughter or at least find some answers. The chief priest arrived at the palace and carefully examined the princess. He chanted sacred prayers and used ancient remedies, but nothing seemed to work. After hours of effort, the priest shook his head solemnly. "I have done all I can here, Your Majesty," he said gravely. "I must consult with the gods to understand this affliction. I will return when I have their guidance." Lila lay in her bed, restless and terrified. The beauty she had once taken so much pride in was fading before her very eyes. The rashes covered her skin, and no mirror could hide what was happening to her. Each time she looked at herself, her heart filled with despair. She cried out for her father, the one person she believed could fix anything. The king, heartbroken by his daughter's suffering, couldn't bear to see her like this. Her cries tore at his soul, making him feel powerless. Desperate for a cure, he called for magicians from all across the land, hoping that one of them would have the knowledge to save her. Magicians arrived in groups, each bringing strange potions and casting spells, but after each attempt, they left the palace empty-handed, no closer to a cure. Lila's condition only worsened, and with every failed attempt, the king's desperation grew. He couldn't understand why the gods were punishing his daughter so harshly, and his palace, once filled with hope and grandeur, now felt heavy with dread. As Lila lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, she began to realize the truth. Her beauty, the very thing she had valued above all else, was slipping away, and no one could save her from it. She had once looked down on others, believing her looks made her better than them, but now, she was just as vulnerable as anyone else. Her father stood by her side, holding her hand, his eyes full of sorrow. He would do anything to save her, but as the days passed, it became clear that neither wealth nor power could bring back what had been lost. The kingdom waited anxiously for news, praying for the princess's recovery, but even the people were beginning to wonder if this was more than just an illness. Was it a punishment from the gods for Lila's cruel ways? After what felt like an eternity, though it had only been a month, the chief priest returned to the palace. His face was heavy with despair, and the hope that once filled his eyes was gone. The king anxiously awaited any good news, but the priest's words shattered his heart. "The situation is dire, Your Majesty," the priest said. "The gods have spoken. There is only one way to save the princess. A plant grows at the peak of the mountain that overlooks our village. Its juice is the only thing that can cure her, but the journey is dangerous, and only a man with a pure heart can ascend the mountain and retrieve it. Spirits and ghosts are said to haunt the path, and everyone in the village knows of the mountain's dangers." The king, filled with desperation, immediately offered to make the journey himself. "I will go. She is my daughter. If it takes a pure heart, then I must try." But the priest shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. The journey is not meant for royal blood. You will not be able to survive it. If no warrior steps forward to climb the mountain in 12 days, the princess will die." With that, the priest dismissed himself, leaving the king feeling utterly helpless. His power and status meant nothing in the face of this challenge. The king could do nothing but wait and hope that someone, anyone, would be brave enough to save his daughter. The palace servants gathered in small groups, gossiping about Princess Lila's illness. They whispered cruelly about the awful smell coming from her chambers and how her once famous beauty had faded into something unrecognizable. As Lila overheard their cutting words, tears rolled down her cheeks. The reality of her situation hit her hard, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her actions. She knew the god's punishment wasn't just about her illness. It was her wickedness, her cruelty, that had brought her to this point. Even her father, the king, had offered to risk his life for her, but no man in the village would dare to. She lay in bed, crying out to Nina, the only maid who had stayed by her side. All the other maidens had kept their distance, fearful of the princess, but not Nina. Nina remained faithful, attending to her every need without complaint. Lila wept, "I don't want to die, Nina. I regret everything I've done. My father, the villagers, even the gods, everyone has turned against me. No one will help me." Nina sat beside her, gently wiping away her tears. "Princess, it's not too late. You see, you've finally come to understand what's important. You're realizing that rich or poor, we're all the same. You were fortunate to be born into royalty, but that doesn't make you better than anyone else. What matters is how you treat people, not the power or beauty you have." Lila listened closely, her mind racing with regret over her past actions. For so long, she had believed her beauty and status placed her above others, but now, as she lay on the brink of death, none of it mattered. "I came to the palace because I admired you," Nina continued. "I had dreamed of serving you since I was a child, but when I got here, I saw your cruelty. It broke my heart, princess. But I've always had hope that deep down, you could change. Someone will come to save you. I believe it." Tears streamed down Lila's face as she apologized, something she had never done before. She realized how much pain she had caused and how little kindness she had shown to the people who had served her faithfully. While the princess remained bedridden, the news of her illness spread through the village like wildfire. The young men, the warriors, and even the strongest bachelors all retreated to their homes, refusing to make the dangerous journey up the mountain. Mothers scolded their sons, warning them not to risk their lives for a woman who had never cared about anyone but herself. "Why should we sacrifice our sons for her?" the women said. "A princess who showed no pity for a mother and her baby is not worth such a price." Among those who stayed home, lost in thought, was Mona. He too had been shaken by what he saw in the market square when Princess Lila revealed her true nature. Like the others, he didn't hold any affection for her, but his thoughts kept returning to the king. The king was a good man, a ruler who genuinely cared for his people. Even the neighboring villages envied how far he would go to ensure his subjects' happiness. Mona couldn't shake the sound of the king's voice from his mind, how heartbroken he had been as he pleaded with the villagers to save his daughter. The king had done nothing wrong, yet he was suffering because of his daughter's actions. The thought of the dangerous mountain loomed over Mona, but something in his heart stirred. He wasn't doing this for Lila. No, it was for the king, a man with a pure heart who deserved to see his daughter saved, even if she didn't deserve it. And with that, he instantly made up his mind. The next morning, Mona appeared before the chief priest, his resolve clear in his eyes. He explained that after much thought, he had decided to make the dangerous journey up the mountain. His reasons were not for the princess herself, but for the king, a kind and just ruler who had always put the well-being of his people first. The chief priest, seeing the purity in Mona's heart, nodded in approval and fortified him with blessings for the dangerous path ahead. Without hesitation, he set off, filled with courage. Later that day, the chief priest went to the palace to inform the king of the young man's decision. "Your Majesty," he said, "a man from the village has chosen to climb the mountain. He does this not for the princess, but because he recognizes the kindness you've shown as a ruler. He wishes to save your bloodline, not because of her actions, but because of yours." Upon hearing this, the king smiled, though tears filled his eyes. He was deeply moved by Mona's sacrifice. That evening, he shared the news with Princess Lila. She too was overwhelmed by the thought that someone was willing to risk their life, not for her, but for her father. Despite all the terrible things she had done, her father's goodness was still working in her favor. Filled with gratitude, she made a vow to herself that if she survived, she would make amends with the villagers and seek their forgiveness. Days passed with no sign of Mona, and the king grew more worried with each sunrise. The 11th day came, and still, there was no news. The palace was thick with tension as the possibility of failure loomed over them. That night, however, a guard came running to the king. "Your Majesty, a man has returned. He claims to have the herb, but we barely recognized him. He is tired, worn out, and his clothes are in tatters." The king rushed to the palace gates, and there stood Mona, exhausted and barely able to stand. In a weak voice, he introduced himself to the king, holding out the precious herb. "I have it," he said, almost in a whisper. "Please. I just need water." They quickly gave him water to drink, and the king, overwhelmed with gratitude, raised Mona up on his feet and embraced him tightly. "Thank you, Mona," the king said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You didn't just save my daughter, you looked into my heart and helped me as a father." Mona was led to Princess Lila's chambers, where she lay as pale as a ghost, her body weak and frail. She barely looked alive. But when she saw her father enter with the strange man, and the herb in his hands, hope flickered in her eyes for the first time in weeks. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Mona move with urgency. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be uploading part 2 soon, so make sure to subscribe, like, and comment to stay updated. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Your support means the world to me, and we can't wait to share what's coming next.